Hello, my friends. We are approaching the end of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, and we are re-airing one more episode that speaks to how to support youth with autism and ADHD. You are going to be listening to my interview with Holly Blanc Moses. Make sure you also check out the show notes for additional resources, and we'll be back next week with brand new episodes. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited about the guests that I have today. And, we're kicking off the new year with a number of different topics, new topics. And I'm very excited about this one because we're going to talk about kids with both autism and ADHD. And my guest today is Holly Blanc Moses. She is everyone's favorite behavior expert and licensed mental health therapist. She has over 23 years of experience in ADHD, autism, and anxiety, and is also a mom of two differently wired boys. I'm really excited to speak with her, and I'm so glad that you'll be listening in to this conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Holly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you after we spoke, I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, right? Mm-hmm. And we got introduced. I spoke to you and I'm like, I have to have her on the podcast because we have such important things to talk about. And after hearing about your work with autism and ADHD, it just seemed like a perfect fit for the podcast. So thank you for agreeing to be here today.
You're welcome. I'm super excited to chat with you and get to know your audience too.
Great. And I think when we spoke, and I don't know if we talked about who has been on the podcast before, I know we talked about alignment in the work that we do, working with kids who think differently, learn differently, who are wired differently. And, on the podcast, we've had Dr. Joel Nigg and Dr. Russell Barkley come and talk about ADHD. And we've discussed autism with Dr. Lisa Hancock, but we have not yet talked about kids who are both autistic and have ADHD. And that is where you come in because this is your area of expertise. I know you've helped a lot of families who have kids with this profile. So I'd love to just jump in and kind of talk about, what does it first look like when kids are autistic and they have ADHD? How are they different than kids who might just have one of those diagnoses?
They're the coolest.
Yes. I love that you start with that because it's true.
It's true. It's not like a professional way to say it, I guess, but they are the coolest, in my opinion. What's really neat about this is it's different. And the old DSM, we weren't actually able to diagnose both autism and ADHD together, which was kind of ridiculous.
It was frustrating because we see it all the time.
So frustrating. And so if you had a child that presented that was originally diagnosed with autism and the parent who knows their child best, the teachers who know kids very well because they see so many every day and say, actually, I think ADHD is going on too. And then, sorry, there's nothing we can do. We can't diagnose both. So I'm thrilled. And I'm also glad that we're going to get more data and research going in this area now that they're both more likely to be diagnosed together. But I do see a difference in kids that I work with in my private practice. And I see children who are diagnosed with autism, children who are diagnosed with ADHD, and kids that are diagnosed with both. And there is a lot of overlap. Actually, Duke is doing some neat research right now looking at that overlap. So again, we're really kind of breaking ground in a lot of ways for the first time. So some children, it gets a little bit tricky because there are some social overlaps with this. Sometimes kids with ADHD don't quite know, space and they're kind of in your face and they're impulsive and, they may run up and just grab you and hug you and, doing these kind of things that you may not typically see. And they're running and running and running around. And then maybe a child who is on the spectrum doesn't quite know what to say, doesn't know how to say it, doesn't know how to break into a conversation. So they may say something that seems kind of random, or maybe it's about a particular interest they have, or maybe they just kind of sit back and watch and do their own thing. So even though there are those social differences, they do look a little bit different. But like I said, often I see children that present in both of those ways.
Right. And then you also have the overlap with the self-regulation difficulties for a lot of kids on the spectrum who also have ADHD. And that's also newer too, because I've seen more recently a lot of parents whose kids eventually get diagnosed with ADHD coming in and saying they have a hard time controlling their emotions, but people hadn't conceptualized self-regulation as part of ADHD previously as well.
You're so right. And Dr. Russell Barkley, who I'm a super nerd fan of, by the way, I want to go see him to speak when I was a sophomore in undergrad, and I worked at a conference just so I could hear him because I had no money, right? So you have to work the conferences so you can go. Right. So I'm a super fan of his, and he talks a lot about dysregulation, and hopefully in the next version of the diagnostic manual, we'll be looking more at that dysregulation, because children with ADHD, it's like sometimes they just get so angry. And sometimes it seems like comes out of nowhere, and this irritability, and it's not just this pure hyperactive, impulsive, or inattentive. It's like, whoa, where did this come from? And so we have to think about that dysregulation as well, because oftentimes you'll see that across kids that are on the autism spectrum and kids with ADHD, and that gets confusing as well. I'm a parent. My 17-year-old is autistic and has severe ADHD, and my 12-year-old has severe ADHD but is not autistic. So it's definitely, there are some overlaps, but there are things that you look at that really do divide those two diagnoses.
Right. And so when you see autism and ADHD in the same child, how does that contribute to challenging behaviors? Because a lot of parents that I've spoken with say, I have a hard time navigating a lot of these behaviors, and they need support. First and foremost, this is my child. They're wonderful. They're beautiful, but there are some behaviors that interfere, that impact a child's ability, to participate in the school environment, to get out of the door in the morning, to navigate friendships. So what are those some kind of unique challenges? And I agree with you, there's probably a lot of overlap as well that you see with kids on the spectrum who also have ADHD.
Right. And definitely that overlap. First of all, you're not alone. I know that so many parents feel that way. They're wanting to cry, and it's just the morning, right? They love their child more than anything in the world. They would do absolutely anything for them. And sometimes you just feel like they're at a loss. It is one of my missions is to train other clinicians to serve these populations, because I feel like some, parents are desperately trying to find people who specialize in these areas. So that's part of what I do, is also train clinicians as well. And you need to find somebody who, first of all, understands you, somebody you can talk to. So number one, I always consider finding your people that get you, whether that's a Facebook group, whether that's a local autism group, ADHD group, or go through chat. I mean, whatever that looks like, find your supports. I also recommend considering therapy for yourself when you're a parent. And that may seem just so, one more thing, right? Piled on this plate. It's already overflowing. But I really think it's absolutely important, because once you can help yourself a little bit, you can also be able to regulate yourself And then that helps you better support your child. I go to therapy every week. Yes, I'm a therapist. Yes, I do this for a living. But this is really important. And I find over and over again that the children I see when their parents are also going and getting their own individualized therapy, that it helps definitely with their own self-regulation. So now we walk into, what do we do for our child? So we'll say you've got your supports in place. You've got that person you can text and say, ugh, today was a day. Or, hey, today my son put his shoes on and brushed his teeth, and I am celebrating. Whatever that looks like, you've got to have that. So then we move on to finding those people that really know what your child is, maybe know in a way, not being your child, but understand this is tough, understand maybe the way they're thinking. Definitely want to do research and hear from people who are autistic, who have ADHD, what their experiences are. Because if you're a neurotypical person, you're not going to have this other insight. You're just not. It's not possible. I actually have an autistic mentor for my older son because I just think that's so important. So then you're finding a therapist, right, that knows and gets this population, and that can be a little tricky. So you want to go on maybe a local Facebook group. Find the parents who know who the good people are. These are some of the most resourceful parents ever on earth. I am convinced of it. Right. They know at least one person is going to know the answer.
Yes. And I just feel like things have opened up since the pandemic where there are more of these groups available now. And there's a greater access to those groups. But sometimes parents don't know where to start or where to look. But I love that you first said, you're not alone. First, you're not alone, because there's so many parents that are dealing with, again, the beauty of their children, but also the challenging behaviors, and they need support. So I love that you talked about that first, because if you are yourself dysregulated or stressed, and, there's been a lot of research on the stress over the last 20 months or so, it's hard to parent and to think about the right thing to do and the appropriate thing to do in situations when you're under a great deal of stress.
Absolutely. And that's an important part. And I think we always want to put our kids first. And they should be. And I'm not saying, fill your cup or whatever the thing is, put your airplane mask on, like you don't hear all that kind of stuff. Right. And you say, hey, that's easy for you to say, right? But I do, instead of going in that direction, I say, what do you need? And as a parent, giving yourself permission to say that. I need this. My child needs things. Every human needs things. So let's go ahead and just recognize what our needs are and be okay with fulfilling those needs.
Right. And it's not selfish for the parent to make sure that their needs are met as well, because it makes them a better parent when they're taking care of themselves.
And I think about this too. Again, and this may be a personal thing. Maybe this is my own thing I need to work through now that we're talking about it. Something gets a little icky to me when I hear you need to, make sure you're okay before you make sure your child's okay. I think some parents feel uncomfortable with that. I know I do. I say it is equally important. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's because when you say I have to be first, parents are like, I don't know how that feels to me. So be like, it's all important. It all is. And I can tell, and again, I do this for a living. I've been, in this field for 23 years now. When I'm tired and I'm stressed and I'm not feeling well, I do get more dysregulated with my kids. And I definitely have to do some check-ins. Definitely respond to them in a different way if I am not where I need to be in order to respond to them. And give them what they need. So that means I'm not having what I need either. And we're all in trouble, right? So I do think finding people who get that, finding people who understand your child, and interview people. I say interview people. What I'll do sometimes is do consultations. where we run down, like, what does this behavior look like? And then also the understanding of what's behind it. And certainly that child's voice, whether they're using words to communicate or not, are really going to be our guide. So what I always want to be careful of is, yes, there are awesome strategies out there, but there's also these little nuances with behavior whether you're neurotypical or not, that we need to know in order to understand the why and then how to shift when that needs to shift. So you really need to be with somebody, a therapist who understands the population. And I'll give you some examples. Sometimes it just feels like your child is being defiant, right? And then if somebody is telling you no, or your child is telling you no, you're feeling the pressure to get to school. I mean, there's all these things. You're going to be more dysregulated. They're dysregulated. And if you feel like someone's just straight out being defiant to you, you're going to respond in a way that's not helpful. I mean, that's just human nature. But what I find a lot of times, it's confusion. A lot of times there's not an understanding of what's expected, or maybe there are too many steps, or maybe it's too hard, maybe it's too easy, maybe it's too boring. Maybe you're using too many words and you're not leaving any time for processing, or maybe you're using words when really it should be something that's written, so the child can look at it. It's a beautiful thing to be able to step back and not look at it in such a personal way, but more of a curious scientist. How can we get to that end goal? And maybe that's walking out the door for school. Maybe that's getting out of the car at school. Maybe that is being able to complete some work in their first class. Whatever that looks like, individualized, that for that child, there is a way.
And it is individualized, because not every behavioral strategy works for all kids who exhibit that same behavior that you want to address. And so I think what I'm hearing is that you have to be in tune to the needs of the child, the reason behind some of the behaviors. That it may look deliberate, it may look defiant, but if there's confusion behind it, then you have to address the confusion before you can address the behavior.
Right.
And I think that is really helpful for a lot of parents to take. And that again comes back to parents not being in that dysregulated stress state where they have to, okay, let me take a step back, let me take a breath, think about why this behavior might be occurring, and then address it from the why perspective rather than what looks like defiance.
It's true. And an example that recently happened, that I was talking to an educator, Maureen, who's fantastic. We were in Target. So my oldest son, who I said is autistic, he works on the weekends at McDonald's, and he usually does kind of like maintenance type of work there. And he gets paid on a kind of debit card type thing. It doesn't go direct deposit into an account at the bank. It's actually on a card. And he had spent some money the day before getting headphones. That's one of his restricted interests. The boy has more headphones than a store. If you were to walk in Best Buy, I'm pretty sure he has more headphones. So he had bought some headphones, and I believe they were, I can't remember, like $50, something like that. Well, he has a Gab wireless phone, which I'm not sure if you've heard of. It doesn't have a browser. So just for safety concerns, he's a pretty vulnerable kid. We want to make sure about who's sending pictures and what's happening for him. So he's able to call and check the balance of this card. And we were in Target. We were in the middle of checking out. And if you've ever been at Target, it is apparently the place to be. I mean, it is covered up, people everywhere, long lines trying to check out. So imagine you're checking out, you're hearing the beeping, the cash register person is helping you out. And all of a sudden, your 17-year-old starts screaming his head off. He told me that I stole his money.
Oh.
And screaming. And of course, I'm horrified, right? I mean,
right.
Everyone's staring. He's like, you stole from me. You lied. Why did you steal money from me? And really it came down to confusion. So I had to regulate myself because that was not an easy situation, especially when you're in public. And he was not aware that when he just checked his balance, when I was checking out, that his balance had the day before hadn't shown that he had paid for the earphones. They had come out the next day. And so he wasn't putting it together that was actually the cost of the earphones the day before. And so I had to kind of calm him down, had to calm the cashier down, by the way. So you have to do that sometimes. Security looked a little concerned, but I was able to kind of move him out of the store, calm down, explain the situation, help him sort of regulate his body and his brain. And then we were able to go back and check out. But that was confusion. And it looked horrible. It was embarrassing. It was all those things. But if I was to just punish him, that would have gotten us nowhere.
Right.
It was purely confusion because he was completely upset besides himself. He worked so hard for that money. And now he was confused about why it was gone.
Right.
And again, that's just one of a million examples that happens in our households and in Target every single day, right?
Right. And what you're really describing is a really effective strategy to address the confusion because you had to kind of co-regulate with your son and bring him down, and then you could complete the transaction. But again, if you talked about, if you had punished, if you'd said, why are you yelling? This is not appropriate behavior in the store right now, then that, like you said, would have not gotten you anywhere. And you would not have addressed the underlying confusion that your son was having at that particular time.
Well, and security it could have been an issue of trauma for him. It really could have gone in some bad directions. Right. And so again, that's just, one of many, many examples of really confusion, a lot of times being the underlying issue. A lot of kids will tell me that come and see me in my practice is I don't understand. And then they feel like they can't ask because they're anxious and embarrassed in class. And then we're upset that they're getting poor grades. Right. So there's a lot of things that we can go through. You may hear a child even say, I don't care if I fail. And then the parent is just, what? Why don't you care? You want them to care. And really it came down to after we investigate, because we know these kids have trouble communicating what's happening for them, is I don't want to ask because maybe the last time I asked, they said, figure it out. Or the last time I asked, they said, read the instructions. Maybe the instructions were confusing. So why even bother? Why not just give up? Right.
And that's why the strategies are not only important for parents at home or parents at Target, but also a lot of these strategies need to be implemented at school. And I know you do a lot of work with educators in terms of addressing some of these behaviors. Are there effective strategies that you have found to be helpful in a school setting for kids as well?
Definitely. And again, every child is different. It's important to have a good idea of underlying reasons that you may see certain behavior. That's gold. You want to do that. But then after that, you want to dig deeper, right? Sometimes kids are getting bullied and teachers don't even know. They are stretched thin. They've got large classrooms. They're overwhelmed. And kids can be sneaky, right? I've had some clients where they were trying to get out of going to school, but couldn't tell anybody why. And it turned out that they had people like whispering or saying nasty things to them. And the teacher had no idea. So there's so many things that we have to consider. And again, I always think, is it too boring? Is it too long? Is it too easy? All of these things that we have to consider when it comes to being this kind of detective.
Mm-hmm. And that being a detective is really that first step, because it all comes back to the same thing about really understanding the reason for the behavior, because then you can address it at that level. And then you also want to make that child, that young person, feel like they are being listened to, that they are being heard, that someone is validating their experience, whether that's bullying that nobody is seeing, because that also decreases the anxiety. And, we've been talking about kids on the spectrum and some of the behaviors associated with that, and also comorbid ADHD. But a lot of the kids who have the profile of being on the spectrum and ADHD also experience a great deal of anxiety. And the examples that you gave, I can see that contributing to the anxiety. If you have an issue with bullying, or you have an issue with a teacher who you don't feel is listening to what it is that you need, that can contribute and exacerbate existing anxiety.
Absolutely. And anxiety, and we know anxiety occurs more often in both these populations.
Yes.
So really, I would say the majority of children I see in my practice have been, meet criteria for all three diagnoses. That is actually usually the profile that I see in particular, because imagine being in a world that nobody gets you and you're always in trouble and you're always called annoying. I mean, all these things that these kids carry around all of the time, and it's so hard. I was just talking the other day about, special interests. And so, oftentimes really you can see this in both populations, but particularly kids with autism. And they talk about these specific things that they love so much, and it may not be shared with anyone else in the family, or if it is, maybe not to the extent. And so you hear from other kids like, that's annoying. Nobody cares about that. Their peers are saying this to them. And imagine loving something so much and you're so passionate about it, but you don't understand why nobody else is. And this is the only thing you want to talk about. And not only the only thing you want to talk about, but it feels good to you. And also it's easier to talk about something that you know a lot about, but then people are telling you not to talk about it. And you're annoying and stop. It's hard. And it's hard as a parent too, because sometimes I want to say, son, I'm tired of hearing about this rap star. because it's not this just mentioning it. It's kind of monologues that sort of go on and they're repeated, and it can be difficult. I'm not saying that, as a parent, I get that part too. And I think that's why I can kind of bring some extra to the table, because I can see it as a parent and a professional. But imagine I'm always talking about food, by the way, when I'm talking about behavior or anything, it all comes back to food. If you're looking at a pizza, right, and that whole pizza, you never get to have it. You never get to talk about it. Because no one is listening. Nobody cares about what you love. And so there's, parts, not even just anxiety, but depression that can spiral in to all this too, that, kids tell me they're lonely. They don't have any friends. People are mean to them. Teachers aren't helping them. And there are awesome teachers out there, believe me. And many of them I see and work with on a daily basis. But sometimes, we don't have a match with a teacher and a student, or, sometimes parents are just, again, they're exhausted. But we have to understand we've got to come through some kind of balance, with our kids and our students and our clients.
Right. And that's why the approach has to be comprehensive, and it has to be centered on the child, because, when you have kids who are complex and wonderful, and you can't just address the behavior if there's also attention anxiety, you have to address it all, because they're all related to each other and they all impact each other, and it impacts behaviors that are really important to our daily lives. And I'm thinking about, as you're talking, the social functioning of a child, the ability to connect with a peer or with a teacher and to share your interests. And if your anxiety and your restricted interests are interfering with your ability to establish relationships, then that's where the support is needed. And I know you do a lot of work in that area. And there are things that parents can do, but also educators can do in the classroom as well. And I know that they are stretched thin, but we want to make sure that kids are supported at home and at school when they're struggling in these ways.
There are interventions. I actually have a social skills online course where I go through and detail how to set your child up for social success. And it's actually in two parts. It's very, very straightforward, very easy. I know parents are busy just like me. But one of them is home and one of them is school. And I sort of walk through what a super simple interventions can be, knowing teachers are so busy, that can make a massive impact. And that's what I'm all about. I know that as soon as we hear sometimes we have to do this, or we have to do this, or we have to do this, it feels overwhelming. And then, the follow through isn't there. And then parents feel bad, and then teachers are feeling bad. And it's not about that. It's about stepping back and, like you said, addressing the whole picture after you get a good picture, that is, and then moving forward in a way that's going to best support that child across environments. And really, that's what we need to do. Instead of handing a giant behavior plan, which we know does not work, it's okay. I know this kid now. I've listened to this person. I've seen him. I've observed him. I've observed her. And this is what I'm seeing. And now I'm bringing in information from teachers and parents. And let's move forward together. Let's be on the same page. Let's have regular meetings or communications in some way via email, whatever that looks like. Do it the most effective and efficient way.
Right. And being willing and ready to pivot and to be flexible in our approach.
Yes.
But if something is not working, you don't just do the same thing more often and think that you're going to get a different outcome.
My friend, I cannot say that anymore. You have hit the nail on the head, because people will come initially to see me and say they're not making progress in school, and they're having these once a year IEP meetings. Once a year. Mm-hmm. And so the Sunday before, something had come up with my oldest at school. I emailed the principal, emailed the case manager, and I'm like, we need to get together. And we all got together that Friday. So there is no need to wait. I know schedules are busy, but this is not kick the goal down the year. Because I see that often in IEP meetings. I'm sure you do too. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why are we seeing this same goal? What's happening? And usually it's an implementation difference that needs to happen. Maybe a consult with the psychologist at the school, maybe a meeting with the, someone like me, like somebody who is not in the school system, to take a look and see how we can collaborate. So we do not need to wait. Absolutely. And so I was thinking about, and you know more about this than me, thinking again in a different kind of way, a different kind of approach. And I'm thinking about my 12-year-old in particular, is classes like history, things that are wordy, lots of reading. And from being an expert clinician who does assessments, is of course that would be hard.
Absolutely.
Working memory issues, processing speed, that's very low. All these things you need to take into account instead of you lose electronics because you have a low grade in history.
Right. That's not going to help your working memory.
It's not going to help your relationship, and your child is going to be more dysregulated than ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that contributes to, like we were talking about, the anxiety, but also the self-concept of a child. When you are being punished for something that you have no control over, that you can't, your working memory is contributing to your forgetfulness. And then you're being punished for being forgetful about something that you did, completed, but you left it at home. We have to understand these nuances, like you said, in order to really fully embrace the child and support them in a way that is helpful.
Absolutely. My oldest said the other day, and I said, hey, buddy, you forgot to do this. And I kept thinking, I was like, maybe put the dishes in the dishwasher. I have ADHD, Mom. Give me a break. And so sometimes, some people will say, well, that's an excuse. It's not. It's real. He had, after I said it, it probably went shoo, right past his head into some wrapper he's thinking of, right? So if I was to punish him he's right. He does have ADHD, he has lower working memory than other kids. I can't expect him to do things in exactly the same way. And so if I approach it in the same way, I'm going to fail him. I'm going to fail myself. And he's going to have a really low self-concept, right? So I'm like, you know what? You're right. I should have written that down for you. I'm going to work on that next time. It's much better than screaming.
Yes. How can I be helpful?
How can I be helpful? How can we make this better?
Right. And sometimes that reminder is what it is that they need, because that's what happens with working memory. You just don't remember at the right time. But when you're reminded, it's like, oh yeah, I was going to clear the table. And then they do it. And it's done.
Right. Exactly. Lovely.
So this has been a great conversation. But one thing I really want to touch on is the fact that you talk a lot about, when you're raising kids who are wired differently, that there are rewards and challenges. And I often think that there's such an overemphasis on the challenges that we don't spend enough time celebrating the rewards. Can you talk a little bit about that, the rewards?
Oh my goodness. It's interesting when I think parents, and lots of parents have said this to me, it's like, but I look at Facebook and I see their kids are driving and they're doing this and that. And I think we need to be really careful because everybody's wins are different. Everyone's. I was just interviewing Anthony Ianni, who is an awesome motivational speaker who's autistic. And we were talking about how things do look different for everyone. And his niece just called his sister mom for the first time. And I think she's just turned 4. So it's these wins are not the same. They're not. And there might be a little bit of grief or discomfort there. I didn't think my journey, we ended up adopting from foster care. I didn't know my fertility differences would be an issue. We don't know what this life is going to bring, but I am thrilled. And I try to celebrate everything. And it's a very different kind of mindset when you shift. And you can shift it easy if you practice, right? So my 17-year-old, he had papers strewn across all over the living room floor last night. And at first, the first thing that came up in me was, I am annoyed that there are papers everywhere, right? I almost slipped and broke my face, on one of these papers. And then I said, hey, Christopher, you need to come and get your papers. And I had to catch myself. He remembered to bring them. That's
amazing. And that's a win. We have to celebrate the win.
That's a win. And then my 12-year-old who, again, his processing speed's in the 4th. He has trouble with following directions, all those kinds of things. And I gave him the garbage bag in his room and I pointed to the garbage and I was like, put the garbage in here. I went and did a double check. There was garbage behind the bed, snack wrappers, things like that. And I could have flipped out, but I celebrated that garbage in the bag. And I was like, bud, you did a great job. You put in what you saw. Now I'm going to go around with you and I'm going to see what I can see too. And so what a very different experience. And I think we all need to do that a little bit, not even just with our kids, but a lot of things. I was complaining the other day. I had white paint across my forehead this weekend, paint all in my hair. I had the ridiculous coveralls on. And my husband and I are painting the outside of our house, which don't ever do that. I don't recommend it. It's a horrible idea. And so I'm exhausted. I'm painting. And I thought, this is horrible. But then I thought, I have shelter. I have a house to live in. That's awesome. And so again, it doesn't come naturally for me, but I think we can all work on that. Is their wins may be different than maybe we initially expected, but those are wins. And we need to celebrate that because when you think of these kids, they barely get any praise. They're often criticized. You do this wrong. You did that wrong. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? That's a horrible way to live. Horrible. So think as a parent, think as a teacher, keep a running tally in your head is, what have I done to celebrate them? I caught myself the other day. I had given my oldest son 3 criticisms in a row. 3. And I had to catch myself like, whoa, that's not cool. Like, that's not okay. That's not going to support him. Yes, I've got to correct him sometimes, all of those things. That's our job. But it is not our job to break them down, because they usually get that. They're getting it at school. They're getting it from their peers. We need to be super careful on the words we use and how we behave towards them. So there's just lots to celebrate if we step back and look at it in a creative way.
Absolutely. And I think that you've kind of touched on that we're all human, parents are human, and we will not get it right every single time, but we can catch ourselves and we can practice these techniques. And again, the goal is really to have our kids live wonderful, fulfilling lives and enjoy the lives that they're living. And if we can support them in that journey, then we've done what we're supposed to do.
Absolutely. And so again, thank you so much for having me on. This was really fun.
It was a lot of fun. And I know you've got a lot of free guides on your website, but you also have a course for parents. So if listeners want to know a little bit more about your course, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Definitely. So my website is Holly Blanc Moses. That's Holly, BLANC, Moses. And I'd love for you to come on over. I have free guides, free detective behavior guides, social skills guides. I've got a great podcast if you're interested, the Autism ADHD Podcast. I've got a phenomenal Facebook group of parents who are just amazing, amazing people. Also, I have a group for professionals as well, because like I said, I love to train professionals to be even better, because we're all lifelong learners, right? So we're all trying to be better and support our clients in a better way. So there are, if you're wanting to really dig deep, I do some parent coaching. And then also I have a behavior course where I walk you from the very beginning to the very end on how to support your child through their challenging behavior. And again, I mentioned earlier the social skills course.
Wonderful. And I will put a link to all of those in the show notes. So thank you again. It's been just delightful. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thank you, Holly.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.